now.
Okay, because I was like, it says you're in the show. And I went, oh, okay, I'm just discussing all this background stuff. I don't know if you've noticed, by the way, but like StreamYard added the mirror screen button. And I'm so glad that they did that because it freaks me out when I see my bangs on the
Oh,
wrong side of my head. Because I'm
yeah.
used to seeing my bangs on like the left side because I see myself in the mirror. And I know everybody sees the other side, but it's like this book. It's like Weird Tales. Like I've encountered another version of myself where the bangs are flipped on the wrong side of the head.
You're like, is it really me?
I know, I'm like, this is so wrong.
I actually didn't realize that they added that feature. Thank you
Yeah.
for letting us know. So, hey there, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the live today. I have Amy here, and we are going to be discussing the shadow book of Ji Yun. And if I'm pronouncing anything wrong, please let me know. I looked up some pronunciations on Google for a different book, and apparently they were completely wrong because Ben was watching my video back and he was like, "What are you saying?" So I don't trust Google anymore.
Wait,
But I'm
does
very
he speak
excited.
fluent Mandarin?
He does speak fluent Mandarin.
Okay, I was like, I hope he's not watching. I was like, plug your ears. I mispronounce everything.
Yeah, I was pretty embarrassed too because he teaches me from time to time, and I was so proud of myself. I was like, "Ooh, he's gonna listen to this and understand everything." He had no idea what I was saying. So, we are going to start off with non-spoilers and then move on into spoilers. But first of all, I wanted to let Amy introduce herself and her channel.
Okay, well, my name's Amy, but you might know me as Potato. Potato is Amy's real name, after all. And I haven't been on BookTube in a very long time. So today is like, I'm coming out of retirement I'm like I don't know, a professor emeritus or something. I'm coming out of retirement for today. But most of the time I'm on Goodreads. So I'm just under Potato McBee. I think that's my name on there. So if you are on Goodreads, I am active on there. Yes, I am on time.
I'm just going to go through the comments really quickly. Hi, thank you for being here, Cool Gamer. Hi, thank you for being here, Anitha.
I think
Hi,
it's
Ben.
but
Oh, I'm sorry. It's
unless I've been mispronouncing your name the entire time, Anita.
oh, Anita. Okay, I'm so sorry, Anita. Are you usually late to live streams?
I'm late to everything. Like I had to tell myself, like I have, like basically I was like I have 15 minutes, and I had to tell myself you only have 5 minutes, and that's the only way I made it on time.
Don't worry, me too. I'm always late to things too. I try to be here early since I'm the one hosting, but even then, sometimes I'm still pretty late. So, moving to the book, I thought we can go ahead and share our general ratings, just general thoughts of what we thought. And while we're discussing it, feel free to go ahead and drop it in the chat. Or if you haven't read it, let us know. But or what are your thoughts from reading the synopsis? But I'll let you go first.
Well, I guess I'll start with like if you haven't heard of this book at all, which I actually had not. Let me paste it into the chat just in case. But it's what drew me to it was I'm sure it was one of those like Amazon recommendations. You know, Amazon sometimes says like this is a something you might enjoy, and like it's often wrong. But this time I went, what the heck is this? It sounds really cool. So it's
Yeah.
basically the whole little subtitle thing says the Chinese classic of weird true tales, horror stories, and occult knowledge. So the author, I don't know if you can see it in like the picture, but like I have the digital copy or else I would hold it up. But it basically says he's an Imperial librarian. And as a librarian and an academic librarian, I was just like, this is a colleague from ancient times. I have to like check out his work. So that's the reason I picked it. And I also, I'm a big horror fan, and Weird Tales, they vary depending on what country they're set in. So I wanted to see how, like, I've grown up with because a lot of like Vietnamese like folklore and everything, it's influenced by like China. So I feel like I've grown up with like a lot of these things that he mentions in here, but I wanted to see kind of like the origin story. Like I want to know more about it, and I kind of was curious what they meant by creative nonfiction, which was something that we kind of brought up. It was like, that's a genre, but I guess it's a genre.
And thank you for sharing that background. I think that's hilarious that Amazon for once actually gave you a good recommendation.
Yeah, I
Like, I
mean,
feel like
once
I
in
don't
a
get good
while.
recommend yeah,
No, I said once in a while they manage to do it right.
nice, nice. I don't really look at their recommendations too often, but I might have to start. And so, what are your overall thoughts?
So I really loved it. Hang on, let me fix my settings. I was like, I'm all blurry. Anyways, so yeah, like I was like, I'm just gonna say, I'm giving it 5 stars. I was like, man, I don't know if it's because like I had like I guess the background knowledge of it already, but I just went, this is so nostalgic for me. Like, of course, my mom like didn't tell me all these stories or anything, but it's just like there's like that flavor to it where you're just like, this is so familiar. This is kind of like the stuff you hear growing up, like about the boogeyman and stuff like that. And it's like these little urban legends that are, if not the same, like very similar. So I liked it a lot, and I also like the way that he writes. I don't know if that's like on the translator. If we can give the translator credit for, I don't know, making it like super readable. But I think like in the notes at the end they said that he wrote in a style that was not super florid, which is interesting for like that time period. So like maybe that is just how he talks, but I appreciated that. I'm not really a big fan of like super fancy elegant way of writing. But like, did you like it?
I did. I really, really liked it. I would say for me, it's around a 4 to a 4.5. And we can get into a little bit why I didn't give it a full 5 stars later. But I agree with everything that you said. It's just, it was so digestible. It was also so captivating. Right from the first creative nonfiction story I was in, I was like, oh, yes, I'm going to like this. And I ended up reading it over the course of a month, and I felt like that was the perfect way for me to consume it because it was just something nice to come back to and just have those little pockets of wisdom in the stories, but also read those stories and then even just think about the way that they relate to my own culture and the way that they relate to other books that I've read. I'm also a big horror fan reader, but lately I've been reading a lot more, I guess, grotesque horror. And this reminded me a lot more of the new weird genre that is sprouting in literature. And I actually have an anthology of new weird genre, and I want to see i- if there's similarities because there has to be. So
Yeah.
I very much really enjoyed it. And I'm really glad that you chose this book for us to read.
I know, me too. I really was not sure how it was going to go just because we have like, it was so random. It was just like, okay, this is an older book, but you know how like when you think about translated works from different countries, everybody mentions the same few works over and over again. And
Yeah.
this one was one like, I had never heard of it, like in Vietnamese and English and any language. I was like, I have never heard of it. And suddenly it just came up and it was good. But I'm kind of curious. So like, since I guess like you didn't grow up in like East or Southeast Asian culture. Like were and you mentioned there were like similarities, like there were things that were still like familiar or like resonated with you. Like I wanted to see like just like I know he talks a lot about patterns, like as in like around the world people observe ghosts and it's like even though they're all different cultures, how come they're observing the same thing? And I'm so curious like how like I guess like what things from like your own like culture that like you recognize from this book.
Yeah, and they're not. I noticed a lot of the short stories are also rooted in Buddhism and Taoism.
Yeah.
In those, I didn't necessarily make the connection because I know very little about both of those religions. But oh, I'm so sorry. Hey, Mia.
That's fine.
Yeah. Um, she scared me. um, but what stood out to me were tales about just the way that spirits pass over, or just emphasis on, death and people. Um, there's a lot of emphasis also on nature and on animals. Like at near the end where we have a lot of tales on foxes. In my culture, we don't necessarily have tales on foxes, but there is a lot of emphasis on nature and on animals. So you could see those little bits of patterns that that he
Yeah.
does mention that in every culture there are standards for the way that we treat our dead, or the way we think about spirits, the way that we think about haunted houses. So I did see similarities like that to some of the tales that my mom told me when I was growing up.
Yeah, for sure. I'm always like I some of those like the stuff that's more related to religion, like that was interesting to me because I grew up Buddhist, but like we were kind of I guess like if you were to go by like Western standards, it would be like almost pagan, like very folk religion oriented. So it was Buddhism, but it was also like extremely like it was not the type of Buddhism that you would find in like the temple nowadays. It's a bit like different. And like all the stuff that they brought up, like the kitchen god and everything, and how it was, I loved how like he is like he's trying to be rational, and he's just like, I don't believe any of this, and then all of a sudden he's like, okay, but I saw this, I witnessed it with my own eyes now.
Yeah.
I can't deny it. And I have always felt like in like a horror movie, I am that one skeptical character. Like I'm the one that's like, I'm gonna get killed first. Like the whole audience is like, "Are you kidding me? The ghost is right there." And I'm just like, "Oh, that there has to be a scientific explanation." Like I'm always like, "I'm a woman of science," but there are little things like that where it's like it's, I don't know if it's like it's because I grew up like being taught that, but like I just can't, like every time Lunar New Year comes around, we're supposed to, you know, that thing that he mentioned where you send the kitchen god up to like the heavens, like to talk to the Jade Emperor, and he's supposed to like kind of report on you. And I'm like, without fail, I am always there at my stove every every Lunar New Year, going like, okay, kitchen god, like give me a good report and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like I guess part of me does believe, and it's so weird because like I feel like it doesn't go with like my whole like I'm a, you know, rational skeptic. Like it doesn't. But at the same time, he was saying like skepticism means you have to still kind of see, I guess, like the signs and just accept it instead of trying to impose a scientific or logical order on things. And I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, and when I read that, it actually reminded me of something similar that we do in our culture. We don't identify a god, but we offer ofrendas when people are passing over, and we set up an altar. And I can't remember if there is a story or a god or a deity that we pray to, or a story that grounds that cultural tradition, but it's something that's normal. And
Yeah,
you think about your ancestors coming back and enjoying this delicious food, and it's just normal. You don't think about the, oh, but rationally, is that really going to happen? It
yeah.
just it doesn't happen. But before we get a little bit more into our non-spoiler or later spoiler discussions, I realized we didn't actually let people know what the book is about.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's compiled by a librarian. That's all I say.
But I think a lot of people would really enjoy this, especially if you already read horror, or if you like weird tales or anything that relates to the occult. And what I really, really like, and we both mentioned this, is that it's really digestible and you can just consume it, one day at a time, a story by story, or you can sit down and read a few stories together and really find connections between them. Um, Potato, who would you say you would recommend this to?
I think if it's like somebody who's interested in kind of like the horror genre, but is kind of afraid to step into it like all the way, because I know a lot of people are like, it's interesting, but I don't want to be too scared. Like I don't want to be able, like, not be able to sleep at night. And I feel like this is good for that because it's just weird. Like some of the things, if you really think about it, it's kind of creepy, but it's just creepy. It's not like I am so terrified that I don't want to turn off the lights.
We have that keeping food for ancestors in Hindu religion too.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you
think
for sharing.
it's a way for like the living to kind of grieve and I don't know. I think it brings comfort. Like I used to be like, oh, what's the point of graves? You can just, you know, cremation's the way to go. And then I don't know. And then after my grandma passed away, she refused to be buried. She was, I'm gonna cremate me, throw me in the Pacific Ocean, which is what I want to. But then like I realized, I was like, I have no grave to visit, and like that's that moment where you're just like, oh, so that's why they that's why they have graves.
Yeah, and I didn't want to be buried when I was younger either. I similarly wanted to be cremated. Now I do want to be planted, but and I don't know if you can in the US, but I don't want to be in a coffin. I just want my body to be dropped in the earth. And I mean, at the end of the day, we you can go and go to the gravesite, but you're being recycled to the earth. So yeah.
Yeah, you just need a little grave marker or something.
Yeah.
So people, your family can come and like, hang out with you.
Exactly. I totally agree in recommending the Shadow Book of Ji Yun to people who are a little bit hesitant to go into horror. There is no body horror or anything like that. So I think it's a great introduction, especially because there's also so many different short stories. There's even some supernatural ones. So if you also haven't found out what you love in horror, I feel like this is a great collection of varying types of stories. But if you already are a horror lover and you love to dig into like primary text, and you want to know origins of stuff, and you want to see how texts change over time, I think this is a great book to pick up, because we were just talking offline, but they talk about in the book near the end how Taoism and then just weird stories in China really influenced Franz Kafka, and now how Kafka is sort of influencing modern Chinese contemporary fiction. And so it's a whole cycle, and I just find that fascinating. So if you like to know more about origins of stuff, I think this is a great one to also pick up. Yeah. So I think, is there anything else that we want to talk about that is non-spoiler related?
Oh, I guess we could talk about how he labels it as creative nonfiction, and how, despite it being like very obviously some parts of it, you're just like, I don't know how this can be real, but he kind of records it as if it's history, where it's just like, well, this happened to my relative, this happened to my neighbor. And he also, I love how he mentions, like, I majored in history, so there's this whole thing about like, historians all have a different kind of way of interpreting history. And he was just like, well, if you think about it, like actual history books, like those are just like kind of hearsay as well, or like that's just somebody's opinion or interpretation of like a story. So he was like, so how is this different? And like, so I guess like this is how this genre, like creative nonfiction, like how it comes into it, where it's just like, okay, this could have happened, or at least these people believe that it happened this way. But I guess like make of it what you will. So I think we both said that was like a new genre to us, right?
Yeah, it's I think I read one other creative nonfiction work, and I can't remember what it is now. But he also talks about I'm gonna mispronounce this, ZY. Uh, no, wow, yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Oh,
ZY.
like
Yeah,
the genre, right? Like the weird
yeah.
tale. I know the Vietnamese word for it, which is like UI, but I can't say it in Chinese. Like I'm just like, yeah.
I don't know how to identify how to pronounce ZHI. Like, there's nothing in my brain that correlates with the
I
sound,
know.
and
I'm like, is it G or
I have no idea.
what always throws me off is like, there's like a little thing above like each of the vowels, and it tells you like if it's supposed to be like, up or down or and everything. And I'm just like, I don't know how to.
It's like doing Olympics with your tongue. I realize whenever I try to pronounce anything in Mandarin, I just have to like use parts of my tongue that I've never used before. Oop.
Same here. Like I've said, my sister always makes fun of me because she's really good with languages and I suck with them. So like I'm always like, the scene in, I don't know if you've seen Inglorious Bastards, but the scene where like Brad Pitt claims that he can speak Italian, and he's like,
I haven't seen it.
okay, because like there's a scene where they're trying to infiltrate this like ball with like a bunch of like, I guess like Nazis and like the Italian allies and everything, and then they're just like, okay, we're gonna go as Italians, and he keeps on saying like, we're Italian, and then like he's just like, I speak the best Italian, and then the next guy speaks like, I don't know, like then like he keeps on like, so as soon as he's introduced, like the girl that he's going with, like she's just like, oh no, you probably have an atrocious accent because that's how Americans are. And he shows up and he's like, buongiorno, and I'm like, that's me, that's exactly how I am.
Yeah, I butcher so many words in other languages. That's why I always try to find pronunciations, but I can't trust Google anymore.
Well, even if I hear it, I'm like, I'll repeat it, and I'm like, that sounds good to me, and everyone else is like, oh, what is that?
We're trying.
Yeah.
Really quickly, I wanted to address this. How scary is it on 1 to 10 level? Um, I feel like the scale will vary depending on what you're already
Yes.
reading. I know that you read Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, and I would say that one was maybe like a 6 for me. So I would say this would be more of like a 2 if you compare it to that. So I would say that it also depends on what you find scary. Like there's no body horror, there's not a lot of violence, although I mean there are stories that talk about like eating meat. Uh, but it's not really scary in the sense that there's no jump scares in books, but it's not like a thriller. It's about like supernatural and occult and myths and tales, and they don't get significantly dark, I would say. So I think it's a pretty good introductory short story for horror in that it's relatively non-scary. It's more about it gives like pockets of wisdom, I would say, at the end of every story. It's more of an allegory to something.
Yeah, it's like philosophical horror, which I've actually never seen before. Like I would also give it a 2. And I think, but someone compared horror to cheese, and I think it's really like that. Like, like it depends on what you find scary. Like there's some stories in there where I'm just like, that is really, really freaky. But that's because that particular thing scares me. Like how, like when I said like my bangs were flipped the wrong way and that freaked me out. I don't know if anyone else would freak out about that, but I did. I was like, something's wrong. I think it's that feeling where it's like these stories are like, it's almost like these hauntings and like these things are just a part of life. And it can happen to anybody. And they just kind of accepted it. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, we hear that this stuff happens and it happened to someone I know. And like, and I think he says like, if you live in a haunted house, just move out of the haunted house. So it's like, they really
Yeah.
accept it. They're just like, this is just like hauntings happen.
I remember that story. They were like, something is wrong and we're gonna move out, and then something tragic happened to the people that rented from. Oh wait, let me not get into the stories actually.
Yeah.
Sorry.
In a bit. Oh, hey, Charmaine.
Hey there.
It's like, as you can see, I
Yeah.
finished the book. Oh, I forgot to say, like, you know, you read it over a month. I read it yesterday. So I read the whole thing in one go, and I was just like, you know, this is, but it goes really fast. I would say it's a quick read because the stories are so short. It's almost like a book with really short chapters. So
Yeah.
it's good for procrastinators.
Yeah, you don't notice that you're going through it very quickly because like you said, they're really, really short. So that I guess that's another thing to mention. If you're someone that likes to sit down and follow one set of characters or just one plot over even a short period of time, this might need an adjustment, or you
Yeah.
might need to adjust your expectations going in because the stories are fairly short. Most of them are 1 to 2 pages. I think the longest one I encountered was about 4 pages, maybe 5 pages long. So it is something to keep in mind going into it.
I think a good way to like kind of explain what it is. It's like a set of records, like Imperial records. It's like as if you're going through a whole library of like archives of like weird stories, and you're just like, oh, this happened in this day, and like that's really how it's like laid out. It's not told like a horror anthology or anything, even though you could, and actually not really. It's kind of grouped thematically, where it's like, okay, this is about ghosts, this is about women, and so on.
I'm glad you finished Potato.
Oh yeah, I'm glad I finished too. Yesterday night there was a blackout in my complex, and it knocked
Oh
out the
no.
power in half my apartment only. And I was sitting there like, well, I'm definitely finishing.
No distractions.
Nope.
Um, I think that was oh, sorry. I completely deviated earlier. But I'm not going to try to pronounce it anymore. But the word refers to, and I'm looking at it, it refers to record and strange. And I feel like that is exactly what this is, like a record of weird and strange stories.
Yeah.
Um, but then he does say on here that they were cataloged as philosophy and they illustrated metaphysical concepts. And I completely agree with that too. I
Yeah.
just find that entire genre so interesting. Um, because it's almost no. Well, I was gonna say it's akin to magical realism in a way in that it's just taken as it is, right? It's not
Yeah.
questioned. There's no fantastical elements, but it's for horror and paranormal and weird stuff. So I like that this has impacted the horror genre in the way that it did, and that I got to learn more about this
Yeah.
specific area of horror. Um, yeah, but I think that was all that I wanted to talk about in non spoilers. And I
Yeah.
don't know if there was anything else you wanted to bring up.
I think that was like it for like the overall, yeah, non-spoilery stuff. There's a lot of like spoilery stuff that I was like that I want to talk about. And I would say like actually even if you haven't read the book, like I don't know, it's not suspenseful enough that spoilers matter as much, in my opinion.
I agree. And the stories are short enough that if you were to pick it back up later, you'd probably recognize it if you heard us talk about it, but it's its own experience reading it.
Yeah, and also you might have heard some variation, like in your own cultures or just in like anywhere. It's like I think there's a story about like kind of like a fairy abduction, and it's just like, well, every country has something like that.
Yeah, I agree. So we will be talking a little bit more in depth about the stories, but if you want to stay, you are more than welcome to. I'm just going to put up this banner. Um, okay, so we are in spoiler territory now.
Yes.
There was something that you brought up earlier where, or I mean, that it keeps being brought up, and that everything is taken as reality, as an account of
Yes.
something that happened. And there was a quote that I underlined that I wanted to read for us. Just can't. Oh, here it is. And it just made sense to me because some of the stories too, I had to remind myself, like, hey, this is like being told as historical facts.
Yeah.
But he says simply this: be skeptical of what you hear, yet also have enough humility to accept the world contains more than what you can see or imagine. And I feel that's like right at the beginning. I think it's like one of the first 4 or 5 stories. And I feel like that set up the rest of the book so well because it's true. There's a lot about the world that we don't know.
Yeah.
And I've definitely had experiences in my childhood. And we can talk about more of that later as well if we've both experienced any weird or paranormal stuff. But I just think it was a great setup because I didn't have to suspend my disbelief to take these stories in and really just believe that they happened, you know?
Yeah. I I definitely like I know exactly what you mean. Like I feel like they oh, okay.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Anita.
But yeah, like I think a lot of these stories, like you just like that point that he makes, I really thought about it, especially when it came to the creatures, where he was just like, okay, well, like the Bigfoot, like the Chinese version of it, where they run into the Yeti, and they're just like, well, like of course, like these things live in the forest, like out there near the mountains, and I'm just like, part of me kind of like like those all those Bigfoot sightings, like the really stubborn part of me says no, like there's no way, like they invented this, but the other part is like, I've never been, it's not like I'm a naturey person, I don't go out there.
Yeah,
Maybe there is something like that out there.
exactly. And there's so many, well, not so many, but there's parts of the world that we haven't fully explored and like comb through every single square foot to
Yeah.
find creatures. And we're still discovering new animals every single, well, not maybe not necessarily animals, but different, what am I trying to say? Species, right?
Yeah.
To this day. So yeah, I agree with that. What I found really refreshing about the collection too is that even though we do have stories about like fairies and Bigfoot and haunted houses, there's also some stories that are fairly um like strange, but not in that weird way. Like there's
Yeah.
that one story, I forgot what it was called, but it's about this woman who's living with her mom, and her husband went off to the military, I believe. And there was this man who wanted to marry her. And so he pretended that her husband died or that he was dead. And then he married her. And then her lover came and pretended to
Oh,
be
is that
her
the one
husband.
with the court trial one? That was so strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
And
if you think about it, that's something that could happen. It's not exactly paranormal. It's just weird.
yeah, when I was reading that, I was like, "Wait, am I reading this right? What is going on here?" So I just found that one super strange and weird, but not in a creepy way.
Yeah.
So he does have other types of stories in here as well.
Do you remember the one where the guy, like the fake fortune teller, where he was talking about it was in that collection of I guess like stories about how about fate, like destiny, where it's just and this is very relevant to me because like growing up, like my mom always makes these comments where it's like, if it's not your fate, then it's not going to happen, something like that. And I'm
Yeah,
like, my fate's my own to control. Like there's that, but at the same time, like they mentioned that once you know your fortune, like you're told your fortune, suddenly you make it happen with like you are like, okay, well, I'm gonna die in 2 days, and then the guy decides that he's going to stay in his house for 2 days so he won't die, and then an earthquake hits. And so he engineered his own death pretty much. And the same with like the guy who was supposed to kill that woman's husband and marry her, right? I think that's kind of
yeah,
like the story that you mentioned. And it really reminded me of oh my god, I can't, not, is it Oedipus, like the one who he kills his father, marries his mother. Is that
yeah. I think so.
okay? I always get Oedipus and the guy that follows his wife follows him out of the underworld. Oh, that's Orpheus. Okay, so that's Orpheus. This is Oedipus. Okay, so like where he's just like he just unwittingly fulfills his own like prophecy, and like this is kind of like what happens here, where the guy goes to like this place, and he meets this guy, and he just tells him like, oh yeah, I'm here to fulfill this prophecy, and it results in like him killing the guy by accident, and then later marrying the widow.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was. I just went, hey, this is pretty much the same story.
Just told in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that that section of this collection is what resonated with you most, or is there a different section of the collection that you were like, wow, these stories just like really resonate with me, or they're stories that I've heard over and over again?
Oh my god, there's so many. I was just going through them, and like the stuff about like the afterlife, like reincarnation, like all of that, like that. And then there's the one where how like there's all those stories about paying off debts from a past life, or like, okay,
Yeah.
well, like this person comes back as someone's like son so that they can like repay a debt from a past life. And my mom always told my sister this growing up, where my sister was a really bratty kid, and my mom was like, she'll always be like, I wonder how much I owed you in the past life, like I must be paying off my debt. Like she said that all the time when we were growing up.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, so it was something that I went, okay, like I've heard that before. And we always say that too, where it's like anything, anytime anything happens, like my sister recently had like a friend breakup, and she was just like, 14 years of my life wasted. I was like, maybe you like stabbed her in the back in the previous life. We always like, there's this explanation for it. It makes more sense if you explain it away as like, okay, this because of what happened in the past life, this is why all this, like, even if it's something like unfair, you're just like, well, I must have done something wrong in my past life.
The karma coming back to get
Mhm.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that reminded me of that story, and I can't remember how it ends because some of them I read earlier in the month, but there was a story about. Oh no, you know what? That one was different. That one was a story about the cat who was abused by, was it a maid in the house? Or the
Yeah.
cook in the house? Yeah.
Yeah,
And so like,
the players, right? Yeah.
yeah. And I can totally see one of my cats doing this, like just being sneaky. Cats are so smart, going and hiding the pears so that
Yeah.
she gets in trouble. But in that case, they ended up working things out.
Yeah.
I love that one. I personally love that story and a lot of the stories I had to do with animals. And just that gave me wisdom. I realized that there's some stories in here that presented information in a way that I was like, wow, I've never thought about
Yeah.
things this way before. And I like that non-Eurocentric, non-US
Yeah.
centric perspective. It was really refreshing. I think that's what I love the most about this short story collection. Well, yeah, it is a short story collection. Um, one of the stories that really resonated with me was Checkpoints, and that was the one where they
Oh,
had
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that one too.
Because it's something that you don't and that's where you brought up that he's, like, skeptical, where it's like, "Well, this doesn't really happen, like, they're just" was it passports for the dead? Yeah, right?
Yeah, it was passports and like and then he brought up like all the offerings that you make to the dead, and it's like, does it actually get to the dead? Just,
Yeah, but then they started seeing a lot of, like, ghost and, like, weird and creepy stuff going on, and then it all resolved after everything was reinstated and the passports were given out again and the offerings were made. Um, and, that's something that I've thought about too, like, if we stop offering, um, I guess, food to our ancestors, like, like, what's gonna happen? Nothing's gonna happen, but hey, you never know.
maybe like in Coco,
Yeah,
like where like they just fade away if like you forget to make offerings. And like it made me think again of like my grandmother, where it's like you when she passed away, they were like, you're supposed to pray for 49 days. That's like the Buddhist thing. I actually don't know what any
yeah.
of this means. I'm a bad Buddhist, but like you're supposed to pray for 49 days. It's supposed to help the spirit, like I guess like the checkpoints, like they're supposed to make it through checkpoints. And there's like I guess demons and other like bad spirits that can kind of lead them astray. And you're supposed to like the prayers are supposed to help lead them on the right path. And I didn't know any of this, but like I have really bad memory. Like I have like my memory is so bad that I was just like, I'm pretty sure I prayed like maybe like 2 out of the 49 days. I just could not remember. And like I was like, but luckily there are so many family members praying that it's probably gonna make up. That's what I told myself. But yeah, like reading that story, I just went, uh-oh. I just went, okay, I hope everything's okay on the other side.
I find that fascinating, just the rituals that different cultures have. I honestly wish that I had more knowledge of my indigenous family side and the rituals that they performed, because a lot of the newer traditions that we have are very European and Catholic based, just because of my family just becoming very Catholic near the last few generations. So we lost a lot of our indigenous roots and our traditions. So I really, really wish that we had more insight into that. And I think I want to go ahead and look more into different types of, or just different mythologies and fables and tales within my own indigenous um, culture, to learn like the similarities, because there are so many.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
I
share
think
them with us when you find them, because like that stuff fascinates me. I'm just like, I want to know how different cultures like explained these things like back in the day before these modern religions like came and took over. Because my family's it's the same thing where like people are. I feel like it's like the rituals are like dropping off, because I mean, what like either people are like me, forgetful and lazy, or else like there's just like a lot of conversions where it's like people converted, like they marry a Catholic or Christian, they convert, and or like they
yeah,
just don't bother with religion, where it's like, oh, I don't believe in, like there's like people that are like agnostic or atheist now. And like I never really cared about that before. I was like, whatever, it's just like it's your own preference. But like after a while you'd start noticing like, oh, there are things that get lost when you don't uphold that. And I was like, my dad's side of the family is super like hard-headed. They're like, we're holding on to this old folk religion, and I think that's the only reason we still have it. But
I
like
think
the
that's
other branches of the
fantastic.
family are not as they're not as like rigid about that.
I think I that's awesome. I wish someone of my family would have been more adamant about us learning more about our history and our culture. And maybe it's also because of the way now modern technology just captures everything. Like every single second of our lives can be documented if we want to. Like now on YouTube, this conversation will be documented.
Yeah.
Um, but my grandma, she doesn't even know who her grandmother is. Like we don't know We've never met her. She doesn't remember her. Like we don't even know what area she came from. So there's just so many questions that I have about my family and our history, but it's lost because no one saved letters, documents. We didn't pass on oral traditions, or if they did, my mom had a really big family. She's one of 9. And so the stories never made it to her, or she didn't care enough to pass them along. So I really wish there would have been someone in our family who was really adamant about teaching us, you know?
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
about that all the time. And also like just different like the countries that we come from, depending on where we came from, like they've been hit by like, wars and like just like disasters.
Yeah.
And I feel like things like records get lost. And there's always like these gaps that are unaccounted for. You're just like, what the heck is this? Like, yeah, so I feel like a lot of families have that problem, especially like in the U.S. where everyone is an immigrant pretty much. You're just like, oh, like what happened back then?
And now that you bring that up, he did talk about how there was some stories that he had to read and transcribe
Mhm.
that were part of the Imperial Palace that were too just weird or strange or
Oh,
scary to document. I can't remember, but are they included in here? I remember
I
briefly reading about it.
At the very beginning, they talked about how Qianlong, the emperor, his friend, told him to basically censor some of the records, right? So
Yeah.
I went, wait a minute, like, are the censored records actually? Well, I think he had to destroy some of them, and that probably hurt him as a librarian, by the way, just destroying like certain records. Yeah, so I was like, I don't know, I think they might just be lost, but there were some things in here where I was like, oh, I'm surprised that didn't get censored, but
Yeah.
yeah, like I guess like the stories of like cannibalism and all that. But maybe that's just it was too real. Like that cannibalism does happen like when
Yeah.
there's a famine or a war. So maybe they were like, this isn't really weird. This is just life. So I guess the things that are accepted as life versus like weird are, I don't know, the standards might have changed since back then.
Or even, I guess, just the ways in which and I wonder if this was maybe like a political, thing where the government could have stepped in, right?
Yeah.
But then that they didn't. So I feel like that often happens in US history too, right? We like to look away and turn a blind eye to where a government can step in, and we don't want that really detailed or documented or recorded. So it could have been something like that too. I don't know.
Yeah. And also the stories are recorded, like he has to have contact with them. So I mean it's nice that
Yeah.
he actually like recorded stories from like servants and just it seems like very ordinary people in his like town versus just recording the stories of the aristocrats. So
Yes.
yeah, like he's like, okay, well this is this family that I knew and like their servant told me this story and like so he has like those stories in there. But I guess like if he wasn't, the person he was, we might not have had the same records. It might have only been the noble stories, which would have been kind of boring.
Yep. And one thing that I'm always hesitant about going into books,
Mhm.
really old books or books that were written a long time ago, um, is I often have to prepare myself for some level of like misogyny or just I don't know, just I have to mentally prepare myself, but
Mhm.
I didn't really quite like I found these stories to be quite written in a modern way that took different perspectives into account. And that's what I really loved about it. Like you just said, it wasn't just about the aristocrats, it was about ordinary people and their tales, and even just to the language, right? And we do have the translated version. So I don't know how it was written in its original language. But they're fairly accessible, and you don't really see literature that is, like older or wasn't written in modern days to be accessible for everybody to read. So I found that really, really refreshing that it's
Yeah.
very inclusive and diverse.
Yeah, even his poetry, like I am not a poetry person. Every time I see poetry, I'm like, oh, like I don't think I understand it. But like, even the poetry was accessible. I understand this. And like the
Yeah.
writing, even though it's simplistic enough that like, I'm not like, oh, this is a really old book. Like, because some books you read, you're just like, this is a really old book. So this was like you said earlier, I like that word, digestible. It's digestible, but it's still beautiful. Like, it's still like really nice writing. It's not
Yeah.
like something I wrote or something. Like, it's not super technical or anything like that. And also, like, his stories, like, he is so progressive for a guy from the 18th century. Like, and he
Exactly.
was like, yeah, he's like upper class too, right? Like, he was definitely like in the imperial court, and he, like, the stories that he wrote about, like, the women, like, even the stories where it's like the woman was technically a victim, like the one where, like, he found that woman about to be butchered for meat, and, like,
Yeah.
she's technically a victim, but then he makes it so that she kind of like reclaims her, like, her will, like, she's empowered even though she is being butchered. I don't know, it's just, it took a turn that I did not expect. I just went, I thought he was gonna, the guy was gonna save her, and, like, they were gonna get married. That's always what happens in these, like, old stories, and instead she was like, no, like,
Yeah.
and she was like, I'm only here because I refuse to marry that other guy, so why would I? Like, so she just agrees to be butchered, and I don't know, that was so, like, unexpected, and I kind of liked it. It stood out to me.
Yeah, me too. I actually forgot about that story until you just brought it back up. But as soon as you started mentioning, I was like, yes, I remember that one. But yeah, I like just exactly what you said, so progressive. And at first going into it, I was like, ooh, I'm gonna have to prepare myself for some, um, not language necessarily, but some, maybe some things that are going to be here that won't be stand up to modern times. But it did. It held up really, really, really well.
Yeah, and he kept repeating, like, I'm a Confucian. Everything that's like Confucian, you're like, it's like, there's that hierarchy, and it's super, like, sexist and everything. So I
Yeah.
was waiting for that, and he just went, I'm a Confucian, but, and then, like, he has, like, his own take on it. And also, what also surprised me was, like, the stories that are, like, I guess, like, LGBT inclusive,
Yeah.
where I know that ancient China, like, they had, like, it was accepted. It was just, okay, well, lots of people, like, as long as you produce children, whatever. But I don't know, like, I didn't expect it for some reason, especially because he compiled this during the 18th century, and I thought, like, by the time, like, the Qing dynasty was in power, they were in contact with the West, and I don't know. I figured because, like, they kept mentioning, like, Jesuit priests, right? So I was like, okay, well, Christianity's in the picture already, so probably this is no longer allowed. It would be censored, but it wasn't censored. It was just like, okay, well, he, like, it was like 1 second they were pursuing a beautiful woman, and then the next story is a beautiful man, and it's like, just, like, it wasn't even like, there was no censure from the other people up here in the story either. Like, it was just, they just accepted it, and yeah, totally blew me away. It took me by surprise.
I agree. Yeah, the first one I encountered was the one where they were in a carriage, I believe. There
Yeah.
was two men, and then one of them was getting older, for some reason throughout the ride.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was, like you said, unexpected. I was like, wow, because he just put in the story into the book. Like, there was no like, oh, so now we're going, like he just included everything in a very natural and normal way, and I didn't expect that either. I love how inclusive and diverse the stories were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even some of the excerpts that he included, I think there was one that really, I remembered it because I thought it was funny, where it's like they were talking about that king that said he had an affair with a goddess, and that poet writes that poem about him, and he's just like, goddesses are too busy with other things to do kings. Yeah, it's true, but I just didn't think, like, a man from back then would have that attitude.
Yeah, the slight bits of humor thrown in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I did want to ask you, have you
Mhm.
had any sort of supernatural encounters or any weird thing that has happened to you?
Okay, I personally haven't, and I think part of that is just because of the heavy skepticism. Like, my whole, like, if anything happens, I always immediately dismiss it. Where I'm just like, well, that's, like, I mean, there's things where it's like it's been very coincidental. Like, I tend to joke around a lot about things that are kind of dark. So, like, I remember, like, when I was in college, there was this. I lived in this, it was an on-campus apartment, it has 2 stories, and there was like a really high roof. So it was a bit drafty at times. And I always like joked around whenever I was at the bathroom sink where I was just like looking in the mirror and I would always feel the draft behind me. And I'm just like, it's the ghost. And I don't know how, and I invented this story about like, it's a ghost of a little boy and he's haunting this on-campus apartment, which makes no sense. It's always been college student dorms. But yeah, I was like, this little boy, he's 10, his name is Charlie. And I don't know, I had this whole story about him and it was just a joke. And then one day, like my friend was over and she lived in a completely different building. We had never lived in the same building before. And she told me about like, there's a little ghost in her building and like you always feel the draft and you know it's him and his name is Charlie. And I was like, what the heck? And I think like she said it was a little boy named Charlie. And it was just like something super random like that where I went, well, that's kind of creepy. Maybe Charlie's real. But immediately I was just like, ha ha ha, ha. Like what a coincidence. But it was one of those moments that gave me pause a bit where I went, that's kind of an eerie coincidence.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Wait, that's awesome and strange.
It was so weird.
How old were you?
Well, I was in college, and so
Okay.
that's why I think I was like 19.
Okay.
Yeah, so but then like I said, like those were always on campus apartments. They were never like used for anything else. I was like, why would there be a 10-year-old ghost in there? But that's apparently the same age that they picked in her building too for
Yeah.
that ghost. And I was like, maybe it's just everybody just automatically thinks of like age 10, named Charlie or something. I was trying to rationalize it.
Like Charlie is a common name.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And ghosts, you usually go, well, how old are they? Probably 10.
10 year yeah,
Yeah.
usually a 10-year-old little boy, yeah.
Mhm.
I have a similar story where, and these are all from my childhood, so I don't know how distortive they've become with time or if they're even real or if it's just something that my mom told me and I just internalized it and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I remember this." But when I was younger, there was a little boy that I used to play with. Also a little boy, also about 10 years old. I don't think his name was Charlie.
Okay, I was gonna ask, like, is his name
I actually don't think he had a name that I
Oh,
can remember, but apparently I would talk about him all of the time. So my mom just thought he was like an imaginary friend or something, but I would say he was my best friend. We would talk and play all of the time for about a year. And then we found out that previously before the area where, because this is my grandma's house, before my grandma's house was built in this lot, apparently there had been like other homes
Mhm.
there, and there was a little boy whose mom, him and his mom were killed there. And we
No.
don't really know all of the details of like what happened, but basically I think it was a scenario where like the area was being gentrified and people
Yeah.
were asked to move out, and we don't really know the details, but people talk about how there's also a woman who often walks around there and how she walks around with her 10-year-old boy. And there was one time I was playing with him because our house had like a storefront, and
Mhm.
I was playing with him in the storefront, and his mom came to pick him up. And they were just leaving, and my mom was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I was just playing with my friend." And then she saw a woman and a little kid run out the side, and like the street that we live in, it's a couple of like meters, so you have to walk maybe like 2 to 3 minutes before you can turn either way to disappear. And I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh yeah, that's my friend." And then she saw something, so she was really curious, and she stepped outside to look where they went, and they were gone. And she always tells me that story, and I mean I remember him leaving with his mom, but I don't remember them just disappearing out of nowhere. But that was the last time I saw him. It's just something that always stuck with me from when I was younger.
Oh, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
see, like, I think, like, yesterday, before I read the book, I would have been like, "Oh, I wonder what you actually saw," but now, like, now that I've read the book, I'm like, "Okay, healthy skepticism," where you're just like, you might have seen something from the other side. Like, I really, because like my family has had sightings like that where it's like I've always been the stubborn person going like, no, you probably saw something else. But like my family, like my one of my cousins claims that she has a sixth sense, and she's always, I've seen ghosts all my life, Amy. And I'm like, whatever. But like she lives in Sydney, and I know like she has a business where they have 3 stories. It's like a clinic and like a like beauty thing. I don't know, whatever. But my sister worked for her for a bit, and she was over in Sydney for like I think a couple months, and like they kept talking about how like they moved into this new building and like there's like ghosts, like there's this lady and she apparently always appears when you're working by yourself, And I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Only when you work, you like, that's me being skeptical. My sister's more of a believer. So she was like, okay, I don't want to be by myself up there when the lady appears. And they were like, don't worry. She just watches you. She doesn't do anything. But they were talking about how, like, when they first moved into the building, like, I guess the construction workers were there, like, doing renovations. And they were like, oh, I didn't know any of you, because the staff is all female. So they were like, we didn't know any of you were there, like, going to be there over the weekend. Like, we said hi to somebody, and they were like, what the heck? Nobody was there. Nobody was there over the weekend. But I guess, like, there was a woman wandering around in the upper floors, and they saw her there, and, like, there was just this person. How did she get in? This is the third floor. This isn't, like, the bottom, like, story and everything. But yeah, but see, the rational part of me is like, I wonder if maybe somebody just snuck in randomly.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I guess like several different people working there have seen the same sighting, and then there's always that whole scientific explanation where you're like, maybe everybody imagined it because we were all told the same story. But yeah, my sister's like, why would you risk it? Just accept that it could happen. And yeah, so I don't know. Now it's making me rethink all of these, like, stories that people have told me where I went, maybe.
Exactly. It's that quote. I go back to it where be humble enough to understand that we don't understand everything.
Yes.
That was not word for word, but I I don't know. I love that he included that right at the beginning because I am also skeptical. Maybe not as skeptical as you are, but I am. I'm like, well, there has to be a reason for that. Or maybe I remembered it wrong. Or maybe it's just like I said earlier, me internalizing something that my mom said. So it stuck with
Yeah.
me. But yeah, I'm a skeptic as well. Yeah. There
It's a
was
nice
there's
reminder for us.
right? Yes,
Yeah.
that things do happen. Um, there was another time. So this is one that I personally can't remember because I was so young. I was, I think, 3, maybe 4 when this happened. But it's a story that my family loves to remind me of. But when I was about 3 years old, my uncle passed away. But we didn't know he passed away because he lived in a different state. This was in Mexico, because that's where we were living at the time. So we were having like a family gathering or something like that. Just it was my mom and a couple of my aunts. And I had already been in bed because I was small and I went to sleep at like 8 p.m. or something. And they just remember me like running down the stairs and just freaking out. I was having a tantrum. I was crying and I was like, our uncle, like he was in the room with me and he just came to say goodbye. Where did he go? And I was just like super panicked. And they're like, no, your uncle lives in a different state. He's not here. He didn't come today. And I was like, no, he was in the room and he told me like he was saying goodbye to me. I was like, why would he do that? Why would he say goodbye to me? It turns out the next day they found out that my uncle passed away in the night. And like I said, I don't remember any of this.
Yeah.
I don't remember waking up in the middle of the night and going downstairs and screaming. I don't even remember my uncle because I was so young. But my family loves to tell this story that I saw his ghost and that he came to say goodbye. And there was like no way that I would have known he passed away because back then we didn't have cell phones or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it's a story that sticks with me, and I just don't remember it.
And you hear
Yeah.
stories like that from all around the world. Like, like, according to, this book, it would kind of give you pause where it's like, okay, if all these people saw that, like, there has to be a connection. Like, there has to be something there.
Yeah, something's going on. But yeah, those are the only 2 times that I think I've ever had anything out of the ordinary happen to me. Like nothing has happened in like since I've been like 10 years old. Yeah.
Well, I guess that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always say I'd rather live a boring life. I'd want anything dramatic to happen to me. But I had a series, like, I would say a recent, like, spate of, like, really bad luck, like, the past, like, week. And, like,
Mhm.
at the end of it, I was like, okay, who has cursed me? I'm like, I know I'm a non-believer, but who did it? I'm gonna find you.
Yeah.
Because they happen like one after another, and I think part of the reason is probably maybe because I was just so sleep deprived, so I wasn't paying attention. So it's like example, like my tire went flat, and I like I broke a nail off like in the doorway, and it was just like all these like
Ooh.
yeah, just like all of these like really annoying things, and like the blackout last night, like just like inconvenient stuff, like my pantry shelf collapsed, and I was just like, ah. But yeah, like it's like this like these little things where it's not like, I wouldn't say they're dangerous, but they're just so annoying that you're like, somebody has to have placed a curse on me. That's what it is.
Yeah. And see, and then normally I would have, if that would have happened to me, I would have been like, well, I don't ever really notice when things go really well all the time, but I always notice when things go bad. So it's probably me just noticing that things are going bad for
You're
once.
most likely right. And I was like, that's exactly, that's the thing. It's like, is there such a thing as bad luck? Maybe. I don't think so, but but when it happens all in a row like that, you're just like, all right, what is going on?
Yes, yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Going back to the book, I actually so you know how it's divided into separate sections where the first couple of them are not the first couple, I mean the majority of them are creative nonfiction, and then
Yeah.
the rest, part two, and I think I tabbed it here.
Like philosophical something, right? I can't remember what he labeled it
Yeah.
as. Like philosophies and fables. I think when I saw that label, I just went, wait a minute, you mean the first part was already philosophical? And
Yeah. That's the exact same thought I had because so by the end, I felt like they read pretty much like the first part of the book. I guess
yeah,
maybe it's just stories that he didn't hear from people, and it's just more of a like were these actual fiction or fables that were passed down. I don't know if he explained that.
I think
But
he does split it up into like it seems like the first is just like kind of like this happened in this town, and then the others like he does bring in more of the parable aspect of it, like this king back then and this is his tale. So that does come into it, but I don't know if I don't know, like the split wasn't clear enough for me. Like for me, all of it sounded kind of philosophical and all of it was like moralistic in a way.
exactly. I didn't, yeah, exactly. I didn't feel like there was a clear distinction, and I thought there would be, but there wasn't. And at the beginning, I told you that I gave this a 4 to 4.5 rather than 5. So
Yeah.
the only reason I didn't give it a 5 stars is because he does this a couple of times in some short stories, and I think it's just it's a me thing
Mhm.
where he tells, like he's showing us or telling us about a philosophical event or no, about an occurrence.
Yeah.
Um, but then explains it at the end sometimes, like this is what happened, or like this is why. And I wish I can find an example. I should have tabbed one, but
I think I know
um
you're talking about. I also went, oh, okay, now he's gonna explain like
yes.
Poirot style.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I felt like that was, I guess, unnecessary, and I wish less of the stories had that. But when we started talking about how accessible and digestible it is, like maybe he did that for people who didn't grasp the story. So I feel like there's I feel like I feel a little bit more different about it now. But that was the only hesitation that I had. I just don't like it when stories or books tell me what the result should be. I like to figure that out by myself. But yeah, that it was like a minor thing.
I wonder if he had his own like his fellow scholars in mind. Like he always talks about like, oh yeah, my fellow Confucian scholars, they're all skeptical.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wonder if he was thinking about them, where it's like, you should be more open minded.
You
And that's
know,
why I thought he was
yeah.
speaking to me. I went, oh hey, like, I'm being spoken to.
And maybe that's why they're more believable to us.
Mhm. Oh yeah, like as a modern audience. Yeah.
Hmm. It sounds like a scientific approach to supernatural investigation.
Yeah. Like he basically is going through the paranormal, but from a very like logical standpoint. Like it's not like I'm trying to think. I guess it's like X Files. Yeah, like she's very like logical about it. Like it's kind of like that where he's like, okay, well, what is actually going on here? And then he has to accept that there is a paranormal.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. He does that. And that's kind of where he brings in his whole I guess like the fable part of it, where he's just
Yeah.
like, well, here's a lesson that I learned from it, and I hope you'll learn it too.
Yeah, so that was the only part, but overall really really enjoyed this. It actually reminded me of another book that I read. I think it's called A Thousand, shoot, I forgot the name of it. I'll tell you about. I'll send it to you on Discord because I think you might also enjoy it. It's not necessarily a horror and occult. It's more focused on fables.
Mhm.
But there's one story that really resonated with me when I first read it, and it has to do also with like the Kitchen King, where there's this celebration going on, and there's a bunch of spirits for this particular night that are going to come back, and they need to eat, and they don't necessarily. This is what I found really interesting is I believe this is I think it was a Taiwanese story, but they didn't
Oh,
necessarily need to come back to their family's home. They just need to eat something. And so people leave offerings out for all ghosts that are coming back. And there's this one girl who is like a professional chef, and she comes and like creates a whole banquet for all of the ghosts that are coming through and are eating. And there's one particular ghost who can't find any more food, and she exhausted like all of her materials, and so if he doesn't eat he can't pass. It's just she like cooks up something really, really like quick and brings it out so that he can rest in peace. And I just that reminded me again of ofrendas, and it reminds me of some of the stories that I read in here. And there's just so many cool connections. But I think you would really enjoy it.
oh yeah, perfect. When you find it, send it to me. I'll check it out. Like there's at the end when they were talking about all the books that like kind of you know how like we were talking about how cyclical horror can be, where it's like, hey, this influences that, and like this is trending right now, and like I think they
Yeah.
brought up like all these other like titles, and there was one by like Carmen Maria Machado, and I was like, I need to check that one out because he said that's also creative nonfiction, and I'm like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that that was what it was. I've heard of the book before, I just didn't know what it was.
Is it her collection of short stories, like Her Body and Other Parties, or is it the
It wasn't
her
that one. That's the one
novel?
I do know. Hang on, let me see if I can find it. Oh, hey, look, new book. I can't remember what it's called. I own the Lolo Woods. That's a graphic novel, so that's not it. Maybe it's.
Is it her memoir?
I don't know. Like they. Well, I guess. Well, I'll go back after this and like look.
In the Dream
Look at
House.
in the Dream House. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I guess it is creative nonfiction. Yeah, I have read In the Dream House, and she talks about her abusive relationship, and she frames it as a haunted house. And actually it is creative nonfiction because there's a whole part in there where it's like it's a wait, what are those called? Like follow your own, build your own story, the where you like choose A or B.
Oh,
Like
choose your own adventure.
thank you. That
I
yeah,
love
that
those.
there's a choose your own adventure part of it too, where it goes back to the cyclical part of the horror elements that she uses. It's like no matter which way you choose, there's always you always go back to that like abusive cycle. But she uses horror elements really well in a creative way to like tell her story. Yeah. I feel like we're used to horror being somewhat open ended to leave you spooked a bit when you finish.
Yeah, and I think it leaves it open to interpretation for different readers too, because like I said, everyone is freaked out by different things. So I feel like the slight open-endedness kind of makes it easier for you to be like, okay, well, this is what scared me, and if you interpret it this way, it's even scarier.
Yeah, exactly. It leaves it up to your own imagination. Whereas if someone, I guess, tells you what you should be afraid of, then it's like, oh, well, maybe I'm not afraid of it. Or maybe that's not the things that I focused on.
Yeah. I feel like there's certain books you read, like horror novels, where I'm like, okay, this is really scary, and then they do the reveal where they're like, this is the what it actually is. I'm like, oh man, that's not scary. So it's like in a way, it's sometimes scarier when they don't do the reveal, because then it's your imagination kind of like filling in like what it could be. So like sometimes that is actually like preferable for me.
Yeah. And so I actually did read Metamorphosis by Kafka. And at the
Mhm.
time, I don't remember finding it scary. But now that I read this, I see the similarities, and it's scary in a different way. It's scary in like an adult way of like,
Yes.
have you read Metamorphosis?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it actually really scared me because I'm afraid of roaches, like deathly
Oh,
afraid of roaches. So when I was reading, I was like, oh, like, that's the
like
worst, like
no.
looking up at the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. Like I think like when as an adult, I read that when I was a teenager, and I read it again when I was like I think in my mid-20s, and it really hits differently. Like I think the scariest thing was that nobody cared that he was around. Everybody just went in and just like kept living their life. So it felt very I don't know, isolating.
Yes. Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Metamorphosis was sad. Yeah.
I would never have thought it was sad as like a teenager. I would have just been like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
But like as an adult, like you're like, oh, that is sad.
Yeah, it's depressing and scary that your family I would hope that my family would have not been afraid of me and, like, kept me locked up, and yeah, I think that's where the adult scariness comes in.
Yeah, like you have like no support system. And I was like, my parents are probably, oh my God, I was thinking what they would do. It was like they are helicopter parents. I would have been sent to a hospital. I would have been sent off. They would have been like, you need to cure her. Even if I accepted that I was gonna be a roach for the rest of my life. Like they would never.
Yeah, like, we have to find a cure.
Yeah. And
Well, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And I'm just saying that brings in a whole another aspect of horror to it. I feel like the whole acceptance thing. Yeah, I think well, even with this book, I feel like the horror genre in general, like it lets you explore all these things that are like I think they even mentioned like it's like grief and trauma. You can explore it through horror in a way that's very, very creative and it allows you to process, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I really gravitate towards the horror genre because it often helps you, like, understand feelings or even the state of the world, through a way that doesn't directly talk about it, but
Hmm.
it's still alluding to it, and you're like, "Wow, now certain things make sense to me," or like, "Oh, wow, I didn't realize that I was feeling that way."
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, I
Hmm.
agree. Um, well, is there anything else that as we're winding down, is there any other story or anything else that you wanted to discuss?
I mean, other than like the just what else to read after this, like I mean, I feel like like I said, I have to go back and look at that list that they mentioned where they're like, oh, like we were inspired by this or something else. I need to read all of those.
Yes,
And they mentioned another book, like a sister book or something, and it's supposed to
they
be like the modern version of the Weird Tales. And I went, I should probably check those out. I've never really been a big fan of like the modern Weird Tales stuff, but now I'm curious, like just to see how it translates, I guess, to like modern times.
I have an anthology of new weird tales, and the only reason I haven't picked it up is because it's huge. But since I was able to very successfully read this book, little by little, I feel like that's a great way to approach those. But yes, I definitely want to go ahead and check all of the further reading that they went ahead and provided for us. There's actually a book that and let me look it up because I can't remember the name of it, but I just downloaded it um, and it's also a horror book, and I believe it's called it's called Whisper, and it's by why won't you tell me who you're by? Oh, by oh uh Chang Yuko. It's, published
Okay,
by
I see it.
Hanford Star. I think
Oh,
you might I haven't read it, but from what I read about it, it's also horror, and it's translated horror. I've been wanting to read more, non-English horror, so this is the next one that I think I might read. Not right after this, but, like, the
mhm.
next horror book. But if you read it, let me know.
I definitely will. I am also into like translated horror, like horror from different countries and everything. So I was like, I have like a whole stack of books, and I was like, I'm making my way through these.
If you end up whatever you're reading, that's translated horror, let me know. I would love to also check it out because I don't know. It's
Sure.
just, yeah, yeah, we can talk about them.
Yeah, I was like, this is a topic that could go on about. I was like, there's just so much there. So yeah, like definitely looking forward to like discussing more books from like that are translated.
Me too. Well, I guess with that, we can go ahead and end our live. Potato, thank you so much for coming on here and discussing with me. And thank you for, thank you to Amazon partly, but thank you for bring for bringing up the Shadow Book of Ji Yun. Not only did I get a taste for a different type of horror that's non-American centric, but also I didn't realize he was a historical figure, and I want to learn more about him and other stories that he wrote. So thank you so much for choosing such an awesome book.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Like, I think because you told me to pick a book, that's when I was like, let me see what I can find. I wouldn't have found it otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I probably would have ignored that Amazon recommendation if I hadn't been keeping an eye out for this stuff.
Well, I'm glad that it worked out then.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was fated, if you want to believe in that.
Hey,
Mm-hmm.
it could have been.
Now that I am not a complete skeptic.
Well, thank you everybody in the audience. If you stayed this long or if you're watching back, thank you for being here and discussing with us. With that, we will go ahead and end our live.